Mesa. Fronteras del Conocimiento. Let's start with the second session, Frontiers of Knowledge number 2. Sush. Yes.
Yeah, I have a PowerPoint presentation. Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, yeah, so screen. I'm using this one. Okay. And yeah. Go ahead or go back.
Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone. And thank you for allowing me to be here, and thank you for coming. My name is SJUR SÆVIK, and I work as a digital collection management consultant at the National Museum of Arts, Architecture and Design in Oslo, Norway. And today I'm going to talk about two things. First, how we at the National Museum worked out a new way to catalog our exhibition texts. And second, how we explored the use of natural language processing technologies to extract data from unstructured text materials, such as exhibition texts. Last summer, that is June 2022, the new National Museum for Art, Architecture and Design opened in Oslo. Good. It opened in Oslo after having been in construction for 6 years. This new museum replaces the previous museum buildings that stemmed from the separate museums that were consolidated into the National Museum in 2003. These museums were the National Gallery of Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art, the Museum of Architecture, and the Museum of Decorative Arts and Design. This new museum building meant also creating a completely new permanent exhibition for the museum collection, including art, both classical, modern, and contemporary, design and crafts, and architectural materials. This new permanent exhibition includes more than 6,500 objects exhibited in 90 exhibition rooms. Although the process of opening the new museum and preparing this exhibition was a success due to the massive effort from the museum at large, from a documentation standpoint, there were some aspects of documenting the opening exhibition that we saw had a lot of room for improvement. For the permanent exhibition, an editorial board, along with a plethora of writers, collaborators, and designers, had worked for the last 6 years before the opening to produce all the text materials in the permanent exhibition. These texts included all artwork labels, as well as around 1,000 thematic texts, extended labels, artist bios, audio guides, and other context-specific texts. However, after the opening, none of this material was cataloged in our CMS. If a future museum professional, for example, or a researcher wanted to know what texts the museum had written and had on display in a certain exhibition room in the permanent exhibition at the time of opening, they would have to manually go through non-structured and non-searchable PDFs stored in our archive system. So, in summary, years of knowledge production about our collection and about the artworks on display in our new permanent exhibition. But the texts themselves were not cataloged in a systematic way. So, why does this matter? Exhibition documentation has been an area of focus for the National Museum for the last few years, both because we have seen that historically such documentation has not always met our own demands for art historical documentation, but also because with the new museum opening, we are facing higher demands for documentation and accountability from our government funding body. The National Museum also strives to adhere to the Spectrum Standard for museum collections. According to the minimum requirements for the Spectrum Standard for use of collection, the museum should, I quote, add any knowledge gained and content created while using objects, reproductions, or data to catalog records. And that would include exhibition texts. As a publicly funded institution, we are expected to abide by the FAIR principles for research and knowledge production. That is, research data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Also, at the National Museum, we strive towards the COPE principles, first initiated by NPR in the US, create once, published everywhere. Which emphasizes that production of knowledge content should be done in a format that does not require the work to be done more than once, and that it should be stored in a format that allows publishing whatever the publishing platform. Our awareness of the need to do something about the documentation of text materials stemmed from two different sources. Our work with Spectrum, but also we had worked towards a standard for cataloging exhibitions in general, but we realized that we did not have an internal standard or policy for cataloging exhibition texts. In addition to the question of adapting the standard for cataloging exhibition texts, we had a FAIR and COPE principle that asks that our catalog data should be interoperable, findable, reusable, and compatible with different publishing platforms. So the question was not just what should be documented, but also how it should be documented. That is, we needed to develop a technical solution that would accommodate our adopted standard as well as FAIR and COPE principles. If we could be able to get these 2 points in place, there still remained the issue that historically exhibition texts had not been catalogued after these principles, if at all. And also that our new permanent exhibition had around 1,000 unstructured PDFs without any metadata with exhibition texts. So we also, at the same time, began looking at solutions for actually getting at least some of these texts cataloged according to our new principles. As such, we started looking at different technologies for data mining and also the subsection of machine learning known as natural language processing. So I'm going to start with the last part, then language processing part first. Even though it came later in the logical process of this. So when we looked at how to structure these exhibition texts that we had in a big folder with PDFs, we looked at several approaches to automatically extract data and metadata from our texts. Approaches like pattern-based matching using regular expression worked reasonably well with extracting things like inventory numbers and dates from the text. But what we ended up exploring at length was what is called named entity recognition, which is a specific application of the subsection of machine learning called natural language processing. The aim of named entity recognition is, in simple terms, to recognize entities in unstructured texts, usually labeling them with different categories based on statistical vectors. Rather than using predefined patterns or word lists, a named entity recognition model is trained on an annotated data set of text examples and has learned the statistical probability of words being one or another type of entity based on the context it is used in. A relevant example would be the Norwegian word tre. It is a word that has multiple possible meanings. It could mean wood, the material. It could also signify a single tree, as a tree in the woods, as well as the number 3 or the word that translates in English to step. What a named entity recognition model can do, which a pattern-based recognition model cannot do, is distinguish these meanings from each other based on the context. So that, for example, the word tree used only in context where it denotes the material constituting an object, for example, an artwork is labeled material or artwork material. Or, for example, in the case of the artwork on the left, when the word is used in the construction of an artwork title. This drawing is titled Et tre, or a tree, in which the model would recognize the word as part of a multi-word construction forming artwork title. So NERNAM is our name for our named entity recognition model that we started developing. We didn't start it from scratch, but we continued on what work that was done already. So when we first started looking at the possibilities for named entity recognition, we found that there were already Norwegian language named entity recognition models that worked quite well. Among them, a model developed by the Norwegian National Library that had accuracy comparable to English language models trained on much larger data sets than are available in Norwegian. However, the models we found were very general, both in the sense that they were trained on very generalized text data, and also that the labels that the models were trained to recognize were limited compared to much more versatile English language models. For example, the National Library authored model was not trained to recognize artwork titles, something that is available in the most commonly used English named entity recognition models. So we decided to try to make our own language model. To put it more precisely, we wanted to make a specialized and fine-tuned version of the model developed by the National Library in Norway, training it on art historical text content and extending the model with entity labels relevant for art historical cataloging. So in order to develop our model, we had to construct an annotated dataset that we could use to train the new model. We ended up constructing our dataset based on 3 different sources. The Norwegian Artist Encyclopedia that was published by the National Museum, which makes up approximately 50% of the text material used for the dataset. We used scripts from the audio guides for the new permanent exhibition at the National Museum, which made up approximately 20% of the samples. And also, we used the public API of the National Library's digitized collection of books to extract random sentences from books with the subject heading Art History. These made up approximately 30% Sadly, this API has since been deprecated. So we annotated the initial data set ourselves manually. We are 4 employees in our department, so we shared this task in our spare time. We didn't have allocated resources for this. We decided to extend the label set with the following categories: materials and techniques, artwork categories, style or art historical periods, and artwork titles. So for annotating the dataset, we used an open source annotation software called Docano. In our use case, this had both advantages and drawbacks. The interface for annotation is very simple, and it enabled colleagues that were not into the technical specifics of the project to contribute to the annotation process, which is quite time consuming. Another advantage was that Docano was geared toward collaborative work, so that we could sit and work with the same dataset simultaneously without risking double work and being able to see each other's work in real time. Among the drawbacks was the fact that some technical work had to be done to achieve compatibility with Spacy, which is the Python library which we use to train our model. So we had to use some time to learn some technical specifics to make this work. So the actual annotation process involves going through the dataset sentence by sentence and marking words that should have a label, then choosing the appropriate label from a drop-down list. When a particular sentence is complete, the annotator marks it as finished. As I said, this work was done by me and 3 colleagues at the Department of Digital Collections Management. We annotated complete dataset of a period of about 6 months. That said, this was done on the side when our other responsibilities allowed it, and without devoting any special resources to the project. So a similar project could probably be done in a much shorter time span with directed resources. So after we had done this, we started training our model. This was the process that was very much an iterative trial and error process, and I won't go into the details of how that went on. But yeah, the result, in the end, we achieved these results for our new entity labels. Their accuracy scores noted here are a combination of the model's ability to not have false positives, as well as its ability to label all the words that should be labeled, that is, recognize the correct entities. So as you can see, for a relatively limited data set, we achieved a significant accuracy for some of the labels, maybe all, but perhaps surprisingly, a comparatively low score for the artwork titles. So 76.3% F-score accuracy compared to over 80 and 90 for other categories, which was surprising because in our training data set, the work of art was the one label we had the most examples of. What we found was that the success of training a label depended both on the number of examples of that label in the dataset, but also the variation in the context around the labeled words. So in the case of artwork titles, we had a lot of examples of that label in our dataset, but the context that they were in were very uniform, as most of the examples were from the artist's encyclopedia, which made the model worse at recognizing artwork titles that did not fit the standardized pattern used in the artist's encyclopedia for writing out artwork titles. Typically with the artwork title, then a parenthesis, a date, and place and materials. So in summary, the process went like this. We started learning the tools. We were not technical experts, any of us. We just had interest. We continued learning these tools throughout the whole process. We didn't have any external help, so it was a lot of trial and error. After this, we started assembling the data sets. We manually annotated it, and we trained the model. Lastly, we looked at how to apply this. For our own use, the logical step would be to implement the model in an automated script that could analyze and extract entities from large amounts of texts. But we also wanted to see if we could make a user-oriented application that could be seen as an individual case cataloging aid for texts. So we made a demo or a prototype application for individual use of the model. In this application, the user inputs text on the left, either by writing or copy pasting. The text is then analyzed by the model and showed with its inline labels on the right-hand side, with the possibility to filter by label. In addition, we implemented a rudimentary entity linking component in the application that tries to match labeled entities to authority lists such as Wikidata, or in this case, also the Norwegian authority source, Kulturnav. As you can see in the middle, there's a list of all the entities found in text, and the blue ones are linked to their respective authority files. Yeah, so these were the tools we used for this project. We used Python, and within it, the Spacey NLP library. We used Ducano for the annotation, and for making the prototype app, we used a really user-friendly Streamlit library within Python as well. So back to the question of how to catalog exhibition texts. So the situation was that we had a mountain of texts, but not a specific standard for cataloging them in our CMS. At the present moment, exhibition texts are saved as PDFs in our archive system, which fulfills our legal obligations for documentation, but not the needs or wishes of the people that actually would write, read, catalog, and try to find the texts. So we needed to develop a new internal documentation standard that specified what texts should be cataloged, where they should be cataloged, and how, in what format. The process of developing this standard was not wholly uncomplicated. Even though the resulting standard was fairly simple, we needed to take into account different interests within the museum. While we intuitively wanted texts to be stored in a format that would enable the maximum amount of access, interconnectedness within our CMS, and future findability and reusability, our curators and others who had contributed to producing exhibition texts were concerned about their intellectual rights and copyrights. In a way, storing text in an accessible format in our CMS was seen as less neutral than archiving a dead version as a PDF in our archive system. The museum itself had its own interest in resource preservation and looked favorably on the ability to use already existing text materials instead of doing things over again for new exhibitions, and also possibly using exhibition texts on other platforms such as online social media. These concerns were not compatible on all points, but there was a general consensus in the museum that the possibility for more easily accessible and findable exhibition text for all involved was a good thing. So after having meetings with all the stakeholders within the museum, we arrived at some basic principles for the standard that all could agree upon. First of all, that all text materials produced by the museum for its own exhibition displays should be available through our CMS. Second, that the text should be documented in a way that connects the text to its corresponding exhibition and/or artworks, depending on text genre and its content. But in general principle, the connectedness should be as specific as possible.
We have
Oh, okay, so yeah, okay. Yeah. So just to skip a little bit ahead, yeah. So in order to accommodate this standard, we developed a new documentation format for exhibition texts in our CMS because our CMS was quite limited at this point. So we developed a new module for texts. We had a lot of workshops, user involvement, got a lot of feedback, and this is the result. This is an example of text record. It has connections to the object, exhibition, multiple authors, and related persons, which in this case is the person portrayed in the painting. All these references are two-way references, so you can find text from the object record, vice versa. The text itself is researchable, and you can export the text as pure text. And also I think that's, thank you.
¿Alguna pregunta? Do you have any question? We have time for just for one question. No? Great. Matthew, please. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's go. Well, thank you very much for having me. My name is MATTHIEU. I used to be a library curator at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, where I did many projects about metadata, mainly targeted at interoperability, inevitable talent, and things like that. And then I moved a few years ago to the contemporary sector, first as a publisher and head of metadata in a contemporary foundation, which I will be talking about a bit later. And I was a consultant. Of course, cultural institutions, but most of them are contemporary institutions. And I do, compared to what I did before, is concerned in the national context. It's a different systems catalogs at the beginning. And in France, it's very true that the library sector was is still a bit ahead of the museum sector in terms of metadata, and especially linkable data. And if we consider the museum sector, the contemporary art, especially the private sector of it, so the foundations, are not as much advanced as other institutions. And it's not only a matter of putting enough means that it's also because tests is very different. So as for specific interesting about these days because I'm trying to see how to produce data with material that is coming from not just a few recent projects. So, seeing ourselves working with cultural centers, when we produce data, why should we produce data for projects that are fairly recent? I think it's art centers, people are still here, still alive, so we don't always see the need for archiving and producing data. Archives also continue for producing centers. Usually we consider archive as exhibition materials, public systems, posters, flyers, etc. Necessarily was data that is being produced as during the projects. So this is the first topic. So we try to convince them also that the documents that are produced during the projects are not necessarily made public. It's part of the archive and may be kept for reuse or reference later. This may be very simple. Talking about this among this audience, but in the art center things, it's not that much common. Of course, also we've realized recently that using this data in contemporary art can be very useful. For example, to show the collective effort for supporting artworks. I don't know, you probably know that Howard Becker, who passed away a few weeks ago and who was very inspiring for the contemporary art sector because he wrote that book called Art Worlds, which is, sorry, I can try to figure out which is the two computers. Trying to show the community, which is kind of hidden behind the sole name of one artist. There's many people working on an artwork and even more working in an art exhibition, and they'll often see only one name on the poster. But there's a lot more people behind this. And a few art centers have started trying to build up data sets or at least databases to keep track of what's hidden behind the name of the artist. Also, contemporary art is all about modifying techniques, reusing materials that are used in the industry to make things that have nonsense, things that are different. I have many example of artists that did that in the past few years. And also, building up this data is also contributing to build up data set of what can be done with materials that are not meant to be used that way. So there's also a technical aspect which is very useful for art center, especially those who are producing art, to keep this material. So it's a utilitarian use of the data. And also, there's a huge aspect in contemporary art, which is touring exhibition and using material for next exhibitions. Just looking here, it's not so that now in this very museum there's an exhibition like Nasjonalmuseet, this is the forest Cartier, which is the main promoter of the art in France, and we had several exhibitions by Claudio and Nasjonal. So we have a bunch of data in here sitting about this artist that should probably be useful to be shared with this institution in Mexico that has probably, maybe you have done it, but several editions of exhibition of several kinds, which was struggle quite on the original edition of an exhibition to find some reduced data that was produced, especially from validated text. Which text is used for the exhibition? What is the last version of it? And sometimes it's quite a struggle to find this data back. So, some of the artists that work with, many film studios have a proper archiving system. Practically none of them has one. And so some artists that see the interest of archiving and keeping the metadata in sustainable formats have recently turned to the art sector supporting them to know if they could help them to build a metadata system. So it's also a way for the art centers, the museums in this sector, to work with the art producers themselves to build up the data and share the data with them and kind of a common to produce the data. This is the few drawings I'm going to present you now is a very simple way to slowly go to producing linked data. If you see here a basic pattern of what artists and art center do, the common point very often is that they produce art in common, because for new exhibition, usually they produce new pieces of art, and in that sense, they produce common data, and they have to decide what they should do with this data, who is keeping what, and what we will do. So this is a very basic drawing to see that we're doing. This is not data. I will be going to that a bit later, but this is just a way to see how network nowadays is produced. So there are several individuals going into this. The artist is the main one because he's the creator, the one naming the work, the one recognizing an object as an artwork, which is very important because often we produce many objects that don't always end up as being an artwork. Sometimes they're just drafts that may be finished later. Some artists physically produce their work. There's customers that are doing it, workshops that are working to produce the art, experts that are invited to consult on the specific aspect of the material of the artwork. Suppliers that sometimes don't supply, but they do consultancy on the materials as well, because we're looking for very specific plastic or metals or wood that can be used. And on the other side, you have different institutions, corporate bodies, the gallery, of course, which is usually supporting, when they do well, 50% of the production costs. So there are a lot involved. They show courtesy on the work. So they also have a legal property on the data. And the art centers, of course, sometimes just shows, but most of them have a specific aspect that they're both because the center collection, but also producing work. So some people have workshops, or they commission workshops to produce new works. So this is also the same kind of pattern as exhibition context. So when we do exhibition people working on exhibitions to abuse, register, etc. That use of documents that are very useful. Some of them are public, some of them are not. But specific aspect is that just are still alive, which often concurrent the world of exhibition. Go back to just the issues. So we need to also keep track of what's been seen by the artist and to decide as a valid context. So I started on databases and digital tool. Register and the different aspects can go to the database. And so this data is then used for research, but also for new exhibition and artist material. This is quite something new in France and in many countries, that now artists are using the archive itself as a way to produce new art. And then, because I'm kind of very short of time, I'm going to just present you one example of what could be done if we linked the data that we're producing in contemporary art as a linked art. So I'm using linked art as a data because it's the most simple one to use and it's fitting quite well with our sector. So, data. So something that I'm sure about fashion, and doing fashion anymore. So here's a picture on the left of specifications work that has been made during the production of the work in the same way in the edition, because Lafayette has a production unit. This is the data that has been downloaded by the artist. So this is the final work. Since part of the national work, so computer control and to the 3D scan, scriptation for the artist to prefer the scan to be used for the final work. So that's manuscript and material giving indication to the workshop. So you can see how the process is done during production. So that's in color on the top, you see a basic statement for the work. So I'm not going to go through this, but this is linked on. So this is the way you identify, and all the common terms have been identified in the arts and architecture thesaurus from the beginning. So sculpture, work of art, that comes from the Getty thesaurus. But what I'm interested in is the production zoom on the right. So I've identified the statements as the production from Lafayette anticipation. So this is production, and this is to purpose of the technique that has been used as production, also using the Getty thesaurus. So we've discovered, because I didn't know that, because I worked with the Getty thesaurus many years, but not on that aspect, that the Getty already has quite a lot of the techniques that are currently used by artists. There is quite a few, but there's at least quite a few. The CNC processes is listed. So, and then on this part, we're trying to identify a way to properly state what should be draft, which is a sheet of paper, because a lot of information is validating the production process. How do then Rob Sanderson for correct me on this, because I double checked with him that this could be correct on how to state it properly. And especially what he told me was, we cannot just say this is an inscription that has an annotation by the author, because this is very important. So we had to re-add all the information that I hear at the back to identify properly Martin Major as a person, creating an annotation for that work, because that is a very important information. You have to make sure the artist is clearly identified. So I even used the listening. So consider not only the 3D scan is not modeled here because it's not the most important. The most important is that manuscript part on the print, which can be seen as an inscription that gives the workshop the direction to use next on the next sketch of production. So that was just a short example to show you what could be done with production data, which is something that is, I think, from being a library curator of origin, something very different of what we did before, because we're not describing a work, a final work we see, but we're dealing with a lot of preparatory work, different kind of work that has been done, and we need to identify clearly what is a final sign-off work in the flow, and also how at it has been made by a living artist, which is validating every step of the process. So it's quite different from the main heritage works that I used to work with. So I just wanted to talk with you about it, and that would raise some questions, because it's something that the contemporary arts centers are not very familiar with, but I think they would benefit a lot from using linked data to map the process. So if you need to contact me, this is all about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Matthew. ¿No me oyen? No, sí. Do you have any questions? ¿Una pregunta para Matthew? Please. Hola.
Hello. My name is Marie from the Royal Commission for Alola. My question was more to clarify something about the ACG that you founded. Are you proposing your service to document all the process of the creation of an artwork, or are you also proposing a kind of database to kind of store all this data?
I'm a consultant, so what I do is using the tools that are in place in institutions to help them building it. I can also help to identify the tools that are needed, but I'm not a developer. I'm doing consultancy, and sometimes I'm producing the data on behalf of the institutions if they don't have the team to do it. But my main field is in governance, data governance, and structuring the data.
All right, thank you.
Another question? Pregunta para Matthew?
So the artist has to sign off some levels of information. So what happens when you have a reasoner? So I can extract your data, run a reasoner, get some inferences, get some new data out. Is there any concerns from the artist from these inferences generated from the linked data? Or how do you create the context around this kind of information that can be automated?
Yeah, so to be sure I understand your question was about the artist's position and using the data. Yeah, that's a huge question, because when we started doing this at Lafayette, we interviewed lots of artists and we worked with sociologists and people working with the artist about it. And it was a very different set of positions. Some artists are very keen on not sharing too much data because part of making art is kind of magic, and they don't want so much data to be published or known about what they do. Some others are very keen on constructing data because there's trouble sometimes when they need to do a project to have some structured data to make sure they have all the information they need, especially for its technical aspects, the materials, techniques, how we did that, how we made that pink, how could you have this color. And so it's there's no real answer to that, but the thing we need to make sure is that we're going to respect the intellectual property unless they give a go. Difficulty sometimes between this property of the data. So the art center is producing the work is also has a right to keep the data and structure the data in case they need to redo the show, redo the work, but they can't be made it public unless the artist gives a go. And this is the main position that we observe all the time. So if we have some external request on the data, we make sure the artist or the gallery or the studio is okay with it.
Okay. Another question? ¿Otra pregunta? Bueno, podemos pasar a la presentación de Lucía.
La carpeta sí está en el escritorio. Es esta arqueología.
Muchas gracias. Muy buenas tardes a todos y todas. Bueno, esta presentación será en español. Hablaré despacio por cualquier cosa, pero tendremos el apoyo también de la traducción simultánea para poder entendernos entre todas y todos. Justamente creo que estar en esta mesa de fronteras del conocimiento y escuchar casos tan diversos de problemáticas acerca de la documentación nos hace ver que las diferentes disciplinas tenemos problemáticas o procesos que abordar en común, como los vocabularios o la aplicación de estándares o los procesos de documentación de forma más general. Aquí, de la mano de Pedro Ángeles, que está ahí en el público, y una servidora, lo que queremos compartir es la mirada de la arqueología. Si acaso en México podemos llevar a cabo la aplicación de estándares. Acabamos de tener hace rato una mesa sobre arqueología y documentación y realmente vemos que hay diferentes procesos que se están llevando a cabo en diferentes países, entonces, y problemáticas muy similares a las nuestras, con lo cual vemos el inicio de una discusión muy fructífera. De inicio, para aquellos que no conozcan los antecedentes de la arqueología en México, está esta breve línea del tiempo. Aquí la arqueología como disciplina se reconoce a partir del siglo XVIII, sobre todo de la mano de exploradores y viajeros que fueron haciendo tanto registros gráficos como descripciones de los monumentos y de los objetos. Antes de eso hubo excavaciones llevadas a cabo por la población indígena de sitios abandonados y también en la época de la conquista, en el siglo XVI y XVII. Sin embargo, pues aquí es donde la disciplina toma forma. En el siglo XIX estos registros se enriquecen no solo con las descripciones de viajeros, exploradores nacionales y extranjeros, sino con la fotografía, como la que pueden ver en la imagen. Y para el siglo XX se institucionaliza esta disciplina, se norma, es decir, ya tenemos una legislación y procedimientos para llevarla a cabo, y obviamente como en muchos otros países, en la mayoría de ellos se aplican todo tipo de tecnologías para la investigación. La razón por la cual les compartimos este artículo de la ley federal es porque hay una nota pertinente en cuanto a la práctica arqueológica en México, y es que es una actividad de utilidad pública, es decir, que está normada y organizada desde el gobierno. Y esto tiene mucho que ver con cómo se hace la arqueología y cuáles son sus objetivos. Y en ese sentido, se reconoce de hecho que aunque es una ciencia, hace o cumple funciones de gobierno. Sin embargo, este autor que está citado, Luis Vázquez León, también dice hay varios tipos de arqueología. Una es gubernamental y otra es universitaria. Y esto también da una pauta al hablar de cómo hacemos a la investigación o en qué nos enfocamos de acuerdo a dónde estamos trabajando. Nuestro marco de acción para poder hablar de la documentación es justamente la legislación vigente en México. Y esta legislación es del siglo XX, Lo primero que nos indica es qué es lo que debe hacer la arqueología como actividad de gobierno. Y sus funciones, como lo vemos aquí, son la investigación, la conservación, la protección y recuperación del patrimonio y su promoción y difusión. Pero todo esto está muy permeado por los procesos administrativos y en ese sentido el registro es un proceso más, un proceso administrativo más, con lo cual no vemos la documentación sino el registro, que son acciones diferentes en nuestra labor. Aquí hay más detalle de las funciones que nos pide la legislación en materia de antropología y de arqueología. Aquí en México están juntas. Entonces tenemos tanto la investigación como la gestión integral del patrimonio, su registro en términos de conocer los objetos o los bienes culturales que tenemos, la gestión asociada también de museos, archivos y bibliotecas que tengan que ver con este patrimonio, la generación, que es uno de los ejes más importantes del catálogo nacional, y el que para nosotros, para Pedro y para mí es el más importante, el acceso a la información para todo el público, que es algo que está lejos todavía de lograrse cabalmente. Ahora bien, para poder hacer cumplir estas funciones, en el caso de la arqueología en particular, hay un lineamiento para la investigación arqueológica que nos habla de las modalidades de trabajo. Nos dice que estudiamos procesos sociales a partir de los vestigios o de las evidencias arqueológicas, obtenemos datos y los procesamos para generar información, los interpretamos para generar información, que va a tener tanto fines específicamente de investigación como de gestión administrativa. Sin embargo, nuestras modalidades de investigación son por lo menos dos grandes grupos. Uno es por interés científico y el otro por afectación. Dentro del primero tenemos la acción más conocida, la excavación arqueológica, pero también tenemos el recorrido de superficie, es decir, lo que se hace sin hacer una excavación, recorriendo grandes áreas del territorio, y los estudios analíticos o de laboratorio de bienes inmuebles y bienes muebles. Y dentro de los que ocurren por afectación se encuentran salvamento y rescate arqueológico. Planteamos esto justamente porque en términos de la aplicación de estándares y particularmente de CRM Arqueo, hay una falta de representación de las modalidades de investigación. Creemos que es una discusión que debe tenerse y hace un rato evidentemente todavía no era el contexto, pero tendremos un panel de discusión el jueves para hablar de estos temas en arqueología. Pero creemos que ahí hay un potencial para que estos estándares, particularmente CRM, se puedan aplicar. En el caso de las problemáticas generales, lo que vemos, como les comentaba, es que en México priorizamos el registro y el inventario con funciones administrativas del control del patrimonio y no la documentación de la vida de los objetos o de la vida de los sitios en toda su extensión, desde la investigación, desde la construcción histórica, desde la gestión, etc. Nos falta el diálogo entre instituciones. Les decía hace un momento, hay una arqueología de gobierno y hay una arqueología universitaria, de acuerdo con Vázquez León, y no dialogamos acerca de las normas o de los sistemas de documentación, no desarrollamos conjuntamente parámetros de investigación que están debidamente normados por el Instituto Nacional de Antropología e Historia, pero falta sentarnos como académicos a hablar del patrimonio, en particular del patrimonio arqueológico. Definitivamente nos falta cultura de la documentación y además tenemos problemas de sociología de las ciencias, problemas en nuestras actitudes acerca de la información. Los arqueólogos construimos silos con nuestra información, porque la consideramos nuestra y de nadie más, cuando la información del patrimonio es pública. Y en particular, como les comentaba, en relación con los estándares, aplicamos en diferentes estudios de caso muy locales algunos estándares, pero en general no hay una aplicación común o maneras de dialogar y de hacer interoperable la información, además de lo que les comentaba de CRM. En este sentido, este esquema es cómo trabajamos habitualmente, ¿no? Cómo hacemos un registro en campo y nos llenamos de fotos, libretas, Excel, tablas de diferentes tipos. Gestionamos por separado la información del proyecto con la información de investigación y eventualmente publicamos, aunque eso generalmente no ocurre mucho, pero sí generamos por norma los informes que debemos hacer de arqueología y algunos opciones como ponencias o eventualmente algún artículo pueden ver la luz acerca de esa información. Sin embargo, estas son algunas de las preguntas que tenemos en torno a esta práctica arqueológica en México. qué avances hemos tenido, si es que los hemos tenido en vocabularios y normas, cómo dialoga la información entre los proyectos, cómo se gestionan los datos, con qué sistemas, y si esta información se hace pública y accesible, lo cual, como les decía hace un momento, es difícil. Justamente por eso el romance, no sabemos si el romance es posible o no es posible a cabalidad. Creemos que sí, tiene mucho potencial, pero también amerita muchísimo trabajo de aquí en adelante. Entonces, de momento podemos ver por los procesos en los que nos hemos involucrado que hay desarrollos de vocabularios y algunas reglas, normalmente de carácter local, es decir, en alguna institución o en el marco de algún proyecto, no de forma general, que se aplican algunos estándares al patrimonio, pero de forma local igualmente, y que hay buenos ejercicios de gestión interinstitucional. En el caso de los estándares, tenemos una pregunta para los desarrolladores de CRM y en particular de CRM Arqueo, que tiene que ver con la posibilidad de ampliar las entidades y propiedades, en el caso particular de CRM Arqueo, para que puedan incluir otras modalidades de investigación y no solamente la investigación por excavación estratigráfica o por excavación científica. Vimos que en México tenemos por lo menos arqueología de superficie, estudios muebles e inmuebles, salvamentos y rescates, que no responden a los mismos principios de investigación, aunque sí procuran tener los resultados, por supuesto, con la mayor precisión y con las mismas técnicas posibles, ¿no? Entonces, lo que proponemos y lo que creemos que es posible es una gestión integral del patrimonio, pero amerita muchísimo trabajo de todas las instituciones y la posibilidad de conjuntar la investigación, la administración o gestión del patrimonio y el trabajo de los museos, particularmente de los museos con patrimonio. Este caso, ya termino, me pasé tantito, este caso es uno de los ejemplos que modelamos como parte del proyecto UniArte en el Instituto de Investigaciones Estéticas para ver qué tanto podíamos avanzar. Y definitivamente sí podemos avanzar en el modelado de la información arqueológica y la información del patrimonio. Este sería un estudio de un bien mueble, es la Piedra del Sol, lo que se encuentra en esta imagen, y hay una cantidad enorme de información acerca de este objeto, con lo cual un modelado en CRM y en CRM Arqueo se puede hacer, pero no hay una excavación estratigráfica hecha en torno a este objeto. Entonces nos falta la especificidad y nos falta plantear la posibilidad de tener nuevos alcances, en el CRM Arqueo en particular. Y bueno, entonces creemos que es posible, finalmente, que este trabajo, la generación de datos y procesamiento de información que hacemos en arqueología, se haga con estándares y se apliquen sistemas desde el inicio, o sea, se gestione la información arqueológica desde el inicio en plataformas mucho más adecuadas que hojas hechas a mano o tablas de Excel, y se pueda publicar, sistematizar y publicar, como en el caso de Ariadna, o sea, tener una plataforma para la información patrimonial propia. Finalmente, pues más o menos las conclusiones han estado mencionándose, pero creemos que es muy importante reconocer la importancia de los sistemas de información, que esta información en México, que esta información sea abierta y vinculada, pero también fair, también, como decían hace un momento, que tenga las posibilidades de interoperable, reutilizable, accesible y localizable, y que no solamente publiquemos los datos de interpretación o los catálogos de los museos, sino también los datos duros que permiten dialogar a los proyectos de investigación. Nuestra principal frontera, creo, es que tenemos un serio problema de manejo de nuestra información como profesionales, que seríamos los arqueólogos en el patrimonio. Entonces, nuestra pregunta final es, no es una dificultad legal, tenemos una ley bastante sólida, no es una dificultad tecnológica, podemos ir hacia allá, pero sí de comportamiento profesional. Y si acaso todos trabajamos a favor del patrimonio. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Tenemos un momento para una pregunta. We have one question. Any question for Lucia? No? No questions? So we can go for a lunch. No? Lunch is upstairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you.